Okay. The meeting is now being live streamed, so you can call it to order.
All right. So. Oh, I have to change it over here. Okay. So good morning, everyone. We will call to order at 10:04, 10:03 a.m. And this is the evaluation team for our summer investments for feeding. So at this time, I am going to ask Miss Jacinta Clay to call the roll.
Robin Blank.
Here.
Emily Fritz.
Here.
Michelle Gale.
Here.
Brent Johnson.
Here.
John Trombetta.
Here.
Outstanding. And so at this time, I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
And I'll second it.
So we'll have John move and Robin second, and if it's consensus, we'll go ahead and move forward. Outstanding. Now we have Jacinta Clay. Do we have any general public comment?
There's no public comment.
Right, outstanding. And so at this time, I am very happy to our procurement manager for our summer procurements, Holly McPhail.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again so much for serving in the capacity for our summer feeding community investment panel. There are several documents in front of you, and I would like to note that the long document is a draft, and would encourage all of you to take out a pen, and we should have put draft on there, but encourage you to share that as draft. At the conclusion of today's meeting, we will make this final, and then it will be published on our website. Any members of the public that would like to see a version of the draft can certainly submit that request. But in essence, what you have in front of you is the overview document for the 10 applications that were formally submitted for summer feeding. There are a few notations on the document, the little star for 2 of the applications to indicate that those 2 applications also submitted an application for summer learning. That is a separate application and should be considered completely separate from your deliberations for summer feeding. In total, the 10 applications came in to be about $1.45 million in requests across those 10 applications. And what you'll see on that draft document is every single individual panelist score so that we can kind of determine highest and lowest, were there any discrepancies and items that you might want to have discussion about. In addition to that, there's also a regular size paper stapled up at the top, and those are all of the comments. We so appreciate all of the comments that you each individually took the time to make, whether it was reflected of that application itself, questions for staff should they be selected to move forward that we can clarify in the contracting process, whatever, just all of that input was fantastic. So the purpose of today, what we'll go through is to determine across those line items. You'll also have a copy of your individual sheet that you submitted electronically. If in today's conversation, you choose to make an adjustment to an individual score for an application or to add an additional comment or to strike a comment, we ask that you keep that document that has your name up at the top, and you make any notations on that document, an initial next to any notation that you make, and that before you leave that is turned in, that will then become your part of the official public record. If you have additional notes or things that you're turning in as part of the public record, we will retain those and make those available to any member of the public should it be requested. But your score sheet will actually be published on our with all of our materials at the conclusion of the procurement, and will be transferred into this overview document that will then go to the full council. Any questions about the materials in front of you right now?
We're going to go through each comment.
No, we do not have to go through each comment. That's a great question. Thank you, Ms. Fritz, for asking. In essence, what we're going to do is kind of go line by line through the 10 applications and determine if there is a need for further discussion or if anybody would like to note or make any revisions to their scores. Up on the screen and for live streaming for any of those that are watching from home, this document again is a draft document and that we will be finalizing it through the course of this meeting. So we will start with tab 8, which is,
Could I ask a clarifying
Yes.
question? So if you can just take us quickly from today's meeting to how this information would be summarized and presented to the commission, or how an ultimate decision would be made about funding or not.
sure. So what will ultimately be presented to the council on April 20th is this document, once it is finalized. That's what will be presented along with the comment sheet. That will be included in their packet for April 20th. And with the final scores and those adjusted based on the discussion here today. Our executive director will present that to the council, and the council makes the decision on funding. You are not making any decisions on recommendations for funding. You are simply scoring on aggregate. They will make that determination.
And in your presentation to the council, is there any draft recommendation, or it just goes to them as a ranking from
So,
however it comes out in the wash today?
so it will go to them as a rank.
Okay.
At this time, I will not present an opinion or a recommendation unless they specifically ask me.
Okay.
But we are leaving that to the council to look at the scores. They'll have access to your comments. Some of them may even be watching today. And they will make that decision on how they want to fund.
And will they do partial funding?
They could.
They haven't said one way, it's not been,
No, they have the ability to formulate their final decision any way that they see fit. Partial funding has not come up in any previous discussions, but it could.
And then you had previously mentioned that if we felt there were either overall observations on the process or process improvements, and I want to clarify that they aren't intended, may not be intended to be criticisms of the process. What is the forum as an evaluator that those could be made?
So we've
Commission may hear them.
actually already received some via email. So when some of our evaluators submitted their score sheets, they just in the email gave us suggestions on the process, on the application, things to make it better. We are not offended by any criticisms. So if you did not do that, you may do that at the conclusion when you are done. Send us an email. Yes, so we'll have a debrief
So we'll
with you,
host
or
a
you can
virtual.
email it.
So the purpose of today is truly to do inter-reader reliability and to not comment on the process for the purposes of today. That does not mean you're precluded from doing that. We will host a debriefing forum with all of the panelists from both summer learning and summer feeding so that we can collectively share all the observations that you made. We believe that there's things that we probably did well and the things that need to be improved, and we want all of that feedback. Ready? Okay.
I will say, I'm going to go down a 30-second rabbit hole for the sake of this being interrelated reliability, and just say, I struggled mightily through, 10 applications on this, because my understanding of the CSC's goal is not to supplant what existing programs may be out there. And we just didn't have runway to be able to adequately evaluate who is out there providing services, other than we know that in some of the at-risk zip codes that many of the residents may be SNAP eligible, but we don't have information to know what the adoption is of SNAP, what some of the concerns are about making application. And so to say that we're looking objectively at 10 incremental applications on services that are out there, and your needs assessment said that they had identified 70 other providers that may be out there doing something. I would preface it by saying I have no doubt that there's food insecurity in the community and in those zip codes. But I have to put a different lens on it through the CSC trying to meet that goal, because there are providers that are by their missions out there doing the primary frontline work, and I don't know how to evaluate their effectiveness before coming in and authorizing another layered in funding. So I'll stop.
Ms. Fritz?
Yeah, I made a lot of comments about the fact that they're funding some of these programs would supplant state, or mainly federal funds. So and that's why I scored some fairly low, because that was it, because you can't supplant, it's illegal to supplant state or federal funds. And I made a public records request to the Department of Agriculture. There are 87, now this is last summer, there were 87 summer feeding sites all over Tallahassee.
Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Blank?
I know, and Metcalf Blank is the
Okay.
same. And I will say that, when reviewing the other scores of the other members of this committee, I viewed it as truly judging based off of the guiding questions that were provided in the evaluation, along with the materials that were submitted. Therefore, I believe my scores for some are quite higher than others, because I truly evaluated based on the information provided for this process. So I just wanted to make that clarification as well.
Are we going to discuss each one?
So yeah, if you, I want to make sure that we're getting through the process. Ms. Blank actually clarified the intent and the role of the evaluator was to use the materials that you have in front of you and the presentation that each of the providers were invited to make, and to use your best judgment. But that doesn't mean that you were precluded from using your expertise or access to materials. Your decision today is to not to determine funding, or really to truly answer the question about supplementation. One of the guiding questions was, how confident are you that this is not supplanting? So if you in your scores reflected a low score because of some concerns that you've stated, that's perfectly acceptable. Our job is, as the staffing team, is to ensure that should they be awarded, we then do that budget audit. So rest assured that pressure is not on your team in terms of your scores, that truly does rest with the Children's Services Council to ensure that the final budget, should they be selected, does not have that. But ultimately, it was their responsibility in the application to make that clear. There was a guiding question for that. So with that, if there's no objection, I would like to start with the North Florida Community Development Corporation and kind of just go through that. You'll see that amongst the 5 evaluators, there was a total score of 301 out of a potential 500 points, for an average score of 60.2. It looks that the highest in this category was by Mr. Trombetta, and the lowest in this category was by Mr. Johnson. Are there any comments in reflecting on those scores, or if any questions that anyone might want to ask one another, or would we all like to?
This is just a case where I was concerned about the planning funds.
All of your comments are absolutely noted.
I'm just saying it for those, because, none of us can read and talk at the same time. I just wanted to make sure that was
Absolutely.
a document that we're just skimming through. And I thought the price per meal was a bit high. So that's why they got a low score. That's why I made some of my scoring decisions.
Right, and I just would say that I think it was an innovative concept that 75% of the funding was going to fund the kiosks. And there was a lot of rental costs associated with the kiosks themselves, and a low price for food based on the total budget request.
And this was one of those that it was a good application. The questions that it answered weren't the ones that were asked in some cases, because it was so innovative, which I liked that it was innovative. And I had the same struggle with but not so much of this is going towards food. But if that innovation, if that concept picks up, if it works, if it can become sustainable, then we're not just feeding for a summer, we're feeding for, and that was kind of a thread in some of my other recognitions too. And that, and that was again, those are questions that weren't asked, so we couldn't, it was hard to kind of find ways to answer them. And so I think that's where I was kind of going with my, with my thoughts is that it's a concept. But I did, in fact, in my comments, mention the portion of the budget going towards the infrastructure versus the food, but at the same time, you know, it's gotta start somewhere. And then there was a for-profit entity in there too, you know, which is always a concern because we don't know what we don't know. We don't, you know, that they're layered in there. And so, you know, you'd like to think that everybody's, you know, doing it for the right reasons, but anytime you involve for-profit, it may change the dynamic a little bit.
So is there anyone who would like to make a specific question to an evaluator or submit a change on their submitted scores for this particular tab?
I would just say, I think I provided a lot of comments that I possibly provided more than I needed to. So if that needs to be, I included my thought process along the way of how I got to my judgment. Is that acceptable?
100%.
Okay, that's.
You must be the last one.
I'm glad- You can follow my train of thought of how I got to where I went.
I'm sure.
Okay, then we will move on to the second tab, which is the good news outreach. The total score was 350 out of a possible 500 with an average of a 71.6. The highest score, not to sound repetitive, again, was offered by panelist number 4, and the lowest of a 34 was offered by panelist number 2. Are there any questions or thoughts about why someone scored high or low?
Well, I had a question, maybe someone can answer. What concerned me is their partner was Second Harvest. Does Second Harvest charge them for food, or does Second Harvest give it to them for free?
So there is a process that Second Harvest does. Please don't quote me, but I think it's something like 10 cents on the pound. They're able to purchase at bulk rates, but their providers do have like a 10-cent fee per pound that they charge their community providers.
Well, see, what I'm concerned about was if we're funding, you know, Second Harvest gets money from lots of sources. If taxpayers or anybody's paying for money for Second Harvest, and then the same food, we're giving taxpayer dollars for the same food again, but the Second Harvest charge?
Again, try to judge your application.
I don't want us to pay twice. I don't want double dipping, and that was one of the reasons why I gave them a low score, because I was not clear about that.
There was a lot of overlap and interconnectivity of these applications.
And I think
overall, and so in my scoring, and that may be why, because I think you'll probably just been looking at it, you know, I've looked at the highs and lows of everybody. My scale is probably a little higher than most. But what I did is I just kind of said, well, that's what they're going to figure out at the next level, because I can't, you know, they'll have to figure that out, because we don't see the whole forest.
But I don't think the CSC is going to, they're the next level, but I don't think they're going to ask that question.
But when we do, or just for clarification, when we do the budget verification, we ask all kinds of questions to ensure that we are mitigating and eliminating any supplantation or anything that might seem vague or repetitive. So that's why we keep saying score on what you see,
Right.
what you know, and then if it meets muster and gets approved, we will go through and do that verification of the budget, purchases, things of that nature.
Because I made that assumption that, you know, if there's kind of a buddy system, like, well, I'm going to apply for it and you're going to apply for it. But if you get it and I don't, then you're going to help me out. If I get it and you don't, I'm going to help you out. We'll roll you into our program, but but you know, again, maybe a big assumption, maybe naivete. But between them and the community, I just feel like the overlap wouldn't, because that's not going to go anybody.
And that was a concern.
The concern about overlap is absolutely noted.
The only other comment I would add on this particular applicant was they had a capacity through refrigeration or freezing, I think $3,197. If approved, would be paid for with CSC funds, and I just would like to ensure that if they move forward in the ranking process, that if there is either through Second Harvest Grant or through FDAC, the ability to get a reduced pricing on any of the infrastructure build out. And you'll hear this as a repetitive one on those that I noted in the application.
Based on your kind of conversation, does anybody have any additional questions or would like to submit a change for number 11? Then we'll move on to the next tab, which is number 14, the Less Fortunate Still Matters Foundation.
I had a quick question on procedure. Where's the best place for me to put notes that I don't have to, for myself? I guess on my phone. Or is that possible?
If you make notes and share them with others, it will become a part of the public record. So your book is yours to keep and take with you.
Okay.
So just know that book is not, like, if you want to make, whatever you do in that book is yours. Okay,
Thank you.
of course. So for number 14, I would say not quite the same. We have 252 points out of a possible 500 for an average of 50.4. The highest, again, for this particular one, was Mr. Trombetta. The lowest was panelist number 3, Ms. Blaine. Any questions about this one from either our highest or our lowest? What did you score? If you have any questions for one another.
I'll just make a quick comment that basing it off the information provided, I did not feel that there was enough information provided to provide higher scores.
I noted it in my comments, but the food and the percentage of the total ask was only 50%. Their anticipated travel reimbursement rate was almost 10 cents up, 99 cents higher than the IRS approved rate. It was unclear what the utility cost was going to be used because I understood they were a mobile service. And then this may dovetail what Robin mentioned, but I looked at the current year ask relative to the annual budget from the prior year, and it was 93% higher than their annualized 22 revenue, which in any business, it's tough to scale that fast, especially when you're dealing with a concentrated period of time to scale and spend.
Based on the comments shared with one another, here, does anybody wish to submit a change to a score? Okay, then we will move to the next tab, number 17, Capital City Youth Services. They scored 379 out of a possible 500 with an average of a 75.8. This one seems a little closer, but Mr. Trombetta, you still are scoring the highest with a 92, and then it appears Dr. Gale is at the lowest with a 62. Are there any questions among raters about scores higher or low?
This was another one of mine that I felt it was an investment in. It was an infrastructure, mainly an infrastructure ask with some, I mean, the feeding component was there, but it would be kind of a, you do this and what, the sustainability piece seemed to be intriguing and their location and their design for all that.
I would have to agree with you. That's why I scored them at that point. It seems like it was more for equipment. There was food in the budget, but it was for build out during the presentation that was clearly disclosed.
Again, I was concerned about supplementation from agriculture and the WIC program. Now, I don't know how many infants they see there, but
I reread this one several times, and then you had put, and this wasn't anything that we used in our deliberations, that they had estimated 2,400 meals during the period of time for the grant, but their only ask in their budget was for capacity. So you can't provide 2,400 meals with refrigeration. I'm not questioning anything other than whether or not 2,400 meals should be assumed in a cost per meal when all they've asked for is refrigeration. And then the parallel comment that I had earlier that I would encourage on the going forward is that I'm not questioning the need. I'm just saying, is there a more effective, cost-effective way for them to secure their request for refrigeration and freezer units?
Any additional questions or comments? Based on the discussion, does anybody want to change their score? Okay, we will move to the next tab, which is number 22 for Family Worship and Praise Center CDC. Out of the potential 500 points, they earned 376 for an average of 75.2. We had a tie for the two highest scores, Dr. Gale and Miss Blank, and then for our lowest score, Miss Fritz, for a range of 52 to 88. In terms of total scores. Any comments from our highest or lowest scores?
What bothered me is that their cost per meal calculation was erroneous on the application. And it bothers me that on the front end, there would be errors because you're going to have to rely on reports for them. Or you're going to get accurate information on the back end. The other thing is that they said they are summer food sponsor. And again, I got the list from the Department of Agriculture. Now, this was last year and they aren't on the list. So I got confused by that. And I'm also concerned about supplanting federal funds.
Okay.
Oh,
Thanks.
did you?
Nope.
Okay.
And because we're moving fast through this is just another one, like a comment I had on an earlier applicant, when they were required to submit a annual budget or a 990, whatever they would show for an annualized operation, and whatever that was, then I would normally look to see what their ask was for this summer feeding program to see how in the world are they going to scale to meet what their capacity was on an annualized basis. So whether this summer feeding is a 8, 10, 12, 14 week max period, again, they're asking, if I recall, they're asking for almost $388,000. Their budget for all of 2022 on their fiscal year was $683,000. So having scaled some businesses in the past, that's a wicked fast scale to be able to do it and show results in a 10 to 12 month period. 50% of their 22 operations is in an ask that's supposed to be spent in 14 weeks.
So good we have an accountant on this committee. No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we
That's very helpful.
moving forward.
And that theme kind of comes through a few of the applications where the budget is 50% or more of what they're asking is 50% or more of their current budget, and you get situations of cash flow and trying to advance costs and things like that, and you wonder how that's going to happen.
Based on this discussion, does anybody want to change your score higher? I mean, I want to be very clear. You can go higher, you can go lower, you can remain the same. That's perfectly fine. Just that based on the conversation, does it influence what you scored? A total score of 368 out of a potential 500 with an average of a 73.6. The highest on this again was panelist.
Errors on applications concern me because you have to rely on them later for data. And you want to make sure that they give you correct numbers. And if they make errors on the front end, it concerns me. They may get errors on the back end.
I did note on this one, I did not see, and I would stand corrected if any of my colleagues saw differently. I didn't see an annual budget or 990 or financials. I only saw February 2023 income
Yeah,
statement.
I saw that too.
Yeah. And so I didn't have the ability to look to see if this was an inordinate amount of scale or an aggressive scaling for this short period of time. I was encouraged that their food ask was 81% of the total budget. Since the ultimate goal is to get the food distributed to the needy.
And I had a issue and I'll kind of ask my colleagues what they thought about this and comment if you like. Because again, a little bit of a theme was a lot of contract labor. A lot of these applications had, it was contract labor. It was heavy in contract labor and not really, some of the budgets did break it down like, for program administrators and for, summer staff, that sort of stuff. But some of them, like just in the budgets, it was just like a blanket contract labor. And I don't know if that's, and there were no salaries. It was all in contract labor. So these are people that don't draw a check from the church. They're not, or the entity. I think one of them was church, but they're not tied to the entity. They're 1099. So they can basically come and go as they want. They could show up or not. What are we doing to judge their performance? What are we doing to make sure they're paying taxes and things like that? And that they're not, if they've got suppliers on their end, how are those controls in place? A lot of basically control issues, I think, is where that's leading. But that was one of the concerns I had in this application was the contract labor with no permanent ties to the organization. And I'm sorry, one more thing. One other thing I noticed in this question, the officers of the organization had salaries. And in that February P&L or snapshot they gave us, there were around $10,000 for officer salaries. And I don't know if that's a determination of like, that's their board officers, or if when they say officers, they mean administrators and organizational folks. It's one of those questions that we can't ask, but or we can ask, but there's nobody answering at this point.
I would
That was
doubt
one of the
it. I would
confusion I
doubt
had.
it. I doubt if board members get paid.
I wouldn't think so, and it's
I mean, I don't
certainly not normal, but
For a 501c3, they
Yeah.
cannot, to be a 501c3 board member should not be.
Okay, that answers the question.
Any additional comment for tab 28? Does anybody want to submit any revisions to their score sheet? Then we will move to tab 30. You'll notice that this is for AMI kids. This particular applicant also made an application for summer feeding. Per the course of the original 12 who did make dual applications, we did have a conversation with every applicant who submitted both of them to determine if their application for food should be considered separate or an integral part of their feed, or was their feeding component as part of their learning. In the majority of those applications, they did rescind their feeding application because it was intended to be part of their original. In the case of tab 30 and tab 39, they requested that they continue with the feeding because it was beyond their learning program. So in this case, we did ask for you to consider tab 30, its application for feeding separately, entirely separately from its application for learning. Based on that, and I preface all of that to say, because we both kind of shift. There was a potential 500 points. They scored 232 with an average of 46.4. With panelist number 2, Mr. Johnson, scoring at 0, and then panelist number 4, Mr. Trembetta, scoring at 88. So, any questions, comments, discussion? I anticipate there might be discussion on this one for moving forward.
The 990 was from their parent company. So we don't really have any idea what their Leon County budget is. So you really couldn't make any sort of financial determination about them. I also thought that they're only going to offer the program for 6 weeks. That's too short. The cost per meal is way too high. And when I asked them if they were going to become a summer feeding program through Department of Agriculture, said, well, the church is going to apply, but if they don't, we will. And I thought, supplantation, I said that, so supplanting funds was another concern. So I just really thought that this didn't meet our needs.
I agree with all of the previous comments, the price of the meals, and I remember during the presentation that we saw as a panel, they did say that they would go to the church for the summer feeding for the regular program. This was this was for families, for kids, or the program participants to take meals home to the families. There was no indication of how many was in the family. The kids would choose, and yes, kids can choose. They can be taught to make wise, nutritious choices, including 2% milk, so that they can take home. But too many questions.
And it was only 6 weeks.
Yes, the time.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Mr. Johnson just because I know that you scored straight zeros and just wanted to give you any opportunity to go on the record to share why you gave straight zeros.
Couldn't ascertain from the budget now after you told me to wipe out anything that I saw with respect to service line 1 and just look at the $11,000 request that was made for food. I couldn't see what type of food or foodstuffs would be offered so that I could ascertain, as Dr. Gale had mentioned, what the nutritional value was of the food. And again, it's a tough one. To grade hard in face of need is tough. My view on this is somewhat, I understand I'm just an evaluator, but I'm the A line of defensive spending taxpayer dollars here. And if asked, I could not in good conscience understand what the ask was for. Apart from it, I can acknowledge that there's a need.
Any other additional comments for tab 30? Would anybody like to submit any revisions to their score sheet? Okay, we will move to tab 35. So this one had a potential of 500 points and scored 433 for an average of 86.6. We were 2 evaluators for our highest were a 95 for panelists 3 and 4. So that's Ms. Blake and Mr. Trombetta, and the lowest score of a 70 from Ms. Fritz. Are there any comments or questions related to tab 35?
I'll just make a comment. Again, judging based on what was provided in the application and in their presentation, I judged it and scored it based on that information. I still wanted to go on record about the unclear relationship between Second Harvest, the other applicants, and how all of that jived together. That though did not play into my scoring because I based it off of the application and presentation.
I'll note that based on my quick summation here, that it was everyone's highest.
With those comments in mind, would anybody like to submit a revision to their score sheet for tab 35? We will move on to 39, Jacob Chapel. The potential here, again, 500 points, they scored a 357 with an average of a 71.4. The lowest scoring was a 59 by panelist 1, Ms. Fritz, and the highest by panelist 4, an 83, Mr. Trombetta. Any comments or questions related to tab 39?
I thought, and someone can help me out here if I misunderstood. I thought $21,000 for supplies like paper plates and that kind of stuff seemed a little high to me. Does anybody want to comment on that? That's Mr. Accountant, you're good at analyzing stuff. It just seemed high to me.
Emily, I didn't have a comment specifically on that. I had a couple others,
Oh, go ahead. I want to hear them.
but I just, if I had it right, it was $178,000 ask for the period. 44% of it was for food. Some portion of what they were doing also was in the supplies. There's a capacity component of it, and I don't have my detailed budget in front of me, but I said there's 15,000 for that. So if any of that was the refrigeration grants or anything that might be available through Second Harvest or FDAC, as this goes forward, encourage staff to look at that. And then I know that I made a note that Emily had encouraged them to explore FDAC summer feeding or Second Harvest partnerships.
I had made some notes around the supplies too, and mainly, I think it was probably around some of the refrigerators. My comment was they're buying supplies that they should already have based on the services they currently provide, as they did not indicate they were going to be buying these additional things for the additional services they were offered. So I wasn't sure if it was a scaling thing or if it just, went without mentioning and it was assumed. That was the comment I had on there. And then their cost per meal calculations seemed high. And again, it was one of those things with the budget, the detail of the budget didn't get down to some of those things that would have answered some of the questions.
And I'm happy to report I did my math right. By the 44%, I put that in my comment as well, going towards food. And that was where they lost complaints for me related to the budget area, was the concern of only 44% going towards food. I also noticed with this applicant, and there were a few others, but I indicated it in my notes where they discussed delivering food to break down that barrier of accessibility, but they did not budget for anything related to mileage. And I think that something that would be helpful is knowing if there are other funding sources to support things like mileage, because to me, it looked like they did not factor in the full cost of the program. And that was a concern.
Based on these comments, are there any additional comments, or would anybody like to submit a change to their score sheet?
Yes, I would like to change mine. On the proposal narrative, I gave them a 31. I would like to change that to 28. And on the budget, I gave them a 12. And I would like to change that to a 10.
These changes have been noted, bringing the total score of 54 for panelist 1. This reflects the total points for tab 39 to 352 with an average of a 70.4. Thank you, Ms. Fritz. Please ensure that you note that on your score sheet before leaving today. Okay. Any additional changes to tab 39? Seeing none, we'll move to tab 40, the community roundtable of the Tallahassee 850. Out of a potential 500 points, they scored 222 for an average of a 44.4. The highest score here was panelist number 4, Mr. Trombetta, with a 63, and the lowest panelist number 3, Miss Blank, with a score of 20. Any comments or questions amongst our panelists for this tab?
I didn't see a budget, the company budget. Did y'all see that?
No, I noted that as well.
The time period was only 8 weeks. The cost per meal is too high, and it could supplant federal funds.
Application just lacked detail. There was a lot of unknowns for me while reading it. I also found it interesting that they indicated that they did not need to follow any food storage guidelines. Because the food would be cooked daily, but then does that mean food's being purchased daily? There were just, I left with more questions than answers when reviewing this. clarification.
I think, Robin, one thing that I saw is that this applicant was partnering, I guess it's a local restaurant, Mr. B's. So for these meals that they were gonna deliver, they would be purchased meals and from that restaurant and delivered.
Okay.
There was a line item in the budget, and I apologize, I didn't note it, that said for a dietitian, and it was unclear to me what role the dietitian was going to play if they were purchasing meals from a local restaurant, unless that dietitian could influence what was going to be created. There wasn't a mention of any summer feeding partnership or partnership with Second Harvest, but in this approach, it wouldn't be relevant because they were giving a hot meal as opposed to the individual food stuff that would go into a prepared meal.
The only thing I noted as well, in addition to those comments, this is a startup. That was my understanding of what we received during the presentation.
And for the record, startups are permitted for summer feeding. They were not permitted for summer learning. Okay. Any additional comments? Based on the discussion, would anybody like to make yes, Ms. Blank?
So I would like to change the narrative score from a 10 to a 15, please, with the clarification on the food storage.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any additional changes, Ms. Blank?
That's it.
So that would bring your score to a 25. That then increases the average, the total points to a 227 with an average of a 45.4.
Thank you.
Okay. That actually then concludes the review of summer feeding. I want to personally thank each of you guys. I know that this was not an easy process. I think sometimes the presentations generated more questions than you had opportunities to have answers to. We do really look forward to the debriefing session of how we can improve this, not only for, thinking of next year's summer bridge, but also in thinking of our upcoming procurements and that process, allowing ample time and all of that. So we definitely look forward to the debriefing. With that, for the purposes of those that are listening, we will finalize the score sheet for the two panelists who did make revisions. Please ensure that those are noted on your score sheet and turned in. For the rest of you, for your score sheets, if you could just sign up at the top, noting that you've accepted them as submitted. And then if there are any changes, like in the comments section, just note those and we'll make sure that those are included for the public record. And
Can we just sign this document?
yeah, up at the top, just sign it, or down at the bottom, anywhere you want, just so that we kind of have it. Yes, what I submitted was good and all of that. And with that, I'll turn it back over to our director.
So let me echo Holly's comments. Thank you so very much. Having served in a scoring role, I know it is not easy and it is very time consuming. However, we are very confident that this was the way to go and are very thankful that you all agreed to do this. While we will have a debrief where we can talk about processes, application, additional information that maybe we should ask, we do want to give each of you an opportunity to provide any quick comments under our member comments section on the agenda. And I will start with Mr. Johnson.
Oh, I think I was pretty vocal through the process.
Okay.
I'll yield my time to Dr. Gale.
I'm good. I was able to share what I needed to.
Okay.
I'll just say I felt like there was a big time crunch on this. It would have been helpful if I'd seen the paper version further in advance, because as I was going through this, I thought of a lot of questions that I should have asked the presenters. But although you said it electronically, it's a little bit of it, go cross-eyed look at a computer. But thank you. Other than that, I thought it was good.
Thought it was great. I would highly encourage other taxpayers in this community to apply to be a part of this process, because I think it is a great way to make an impact, get a better understanding of what is happening in our community and where these dollars are going. I would also highly encourage, and I'll put all of this in writing as well, that the applicants participate in technical assistance prior to submitting an application. I think that that would clarify quite a bit of the confusion that we saw throughout the applications.
Yeah, and I'll dovetail into those comments too. From where you are and for what we're doing, this, it was great, and I appreciate you all putting this together and setting this up for us. And I do think it was a very educational process. But having, raising the expectation of the applicants, I think is the blanket statement I'd like to make, and that, we want to see, better applications and more thorough applications, but also want to see, organizations that are in GuideStar, that are more fortified as much as possible, and are collaborating more as much as possible to eliminate some of the overlap and some of the confusion of, well, both groups are applying, but they're relying on each other for services. So how does this comport? And some of that may, as the CSC matures and this process matures, will probably, take care of itself. But yeah, I thought it was a good process, and I think, our community's gonna be better off for it.
You. And so before we adjourn, I'm going to echo some of Ms. Blank's comments and speak directly to our audience. We do have 3 procurements on the street right now. We need evaluators. It is the will of the council to have the community have a voice in how this money is distributed. And we can only do that if we have volunteers to help us evaluate the applications. And so the work that you have done is invaluable. Please go out and be trumpets for us and encourage others to apply to evaluate. And with that, all hearts and minds, Mr.
Well, I
Johnson,
was looking to let you finish, and then I just needed some clarification,
on the process.
what I need to give back.
We can do that after we pause. So we will not adjourn. We will pause as we will be moving into our summer meeting. But thank you all so much, and we will collect your documents at this time. Thank you.
What specifically do you need?
Yes, yes, you need to say all those things. I have pressed unmute, just so everyone is aware, so that our audience online knows that you're getting ready to reconvene, hopefully. All right, almost back together? No.
We made the mistake of announcing the coffee, so.
See, I made the mistake of going to the restroom. Lost control.
Well. Take it, mention food.
Yeah. We appreciate that. I'm gonna announce it, no worries.
You were a brave soul, he took you all.
He's, Mr. Trumbetto served as our alternate for any disclosures that were shared. So he didn't have to do all of them.
Oh, okay.
That was my point.
Okay, gotcha.
Hi, team. All right, ready? All right. 11:03.
Right. If we are ready, we will call learning to order at 11:03 this morning. And welcome to everyone in our audience online, as well as our evaluators. So we will call to order learning at 11:03. I will ask Ms. Clay to call the roll.
Michaela Denning. Lauren Faison Clark.
Here.
Maxwell Hurl.
Here.
Catherine Tamaya.
Here.
Whitfield Leland. Jasmine Smith.
Here.
John Trombetta.
Here.
Thank you so much, Ms. Clay. We have already approved the agenda with the previous evaluation panel, so we don't need to do that again. I do want to ask Ms. Clay if there is any general public comment on summer learning.
There's no public comment.
Right. So with that, again, thank you for being here, and I will turn the agenda over to Holly McPhail, our Special Projects Manager and Procurement.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for arriving, and hope that you enjoyed a little extra time to yourself this morning as we march through our summer feeding application. I have just a couple of announcements or just kind of clarity of what materials are in front of you and what the process will be for today. The first thing that you'll have is a long document. That long document is the compilation of all of the scores that have been submitted by all of the all of the evaluators. In that document, you'll notice that there might be some highlights of yellow. That is where a perceived or a real or potential disclosure was shared with our team, and that we, following our internal protocol, asked our alternate, which was Mr. Trombetta, to review only those that had that disclosure made either by perceived or a full disclosure. So when you see those yellow boxes on the evaluator tabs, those are Mr. Trombetta's scores as opposed to the evaluator in which they were located under. So we will, when we start discussions, start with those two tabs first before going back to the top tab, and then we'll just go in chronological order to allow Mr. Trombetta to depart the meeting should he desire. The second document that you'll have in front of you is like a longer document that has a whole bunch of comments Originally, we said that there would be a column for comments. There were a lot of comments, which was a great issue to have. So we compiled them all kind of separately. They are listed in chronological order, and they do indicate the evaluator who submitted the comment with their initials. Those initials should match what you have on your big document, panelist 1, panelist 2, panelist 3, et cetera. Finally, you'll have your score sheet as submitted. Your name will be handwritten up at the top. Today, as we go through each of these pieces, if you would like to submit a change to a score based on the discussion, we would ask that you note that on that individual document and that you put an initial next to it. At the end of today's meeting, we'll ask that you sign that document, and that's part of your public record. If you have additional notes that you want submitted as part of the record, you are able to submit them, but know that your book, so long as you have not shared that book with any other members of this team or on this review panel, is yours. That's not part of the record, but your comments that you submitted, that score sheet is. The role of today is to go line by line through each of them to identify the scores and to allow each of the evaluators to offer clarity of why they scored something high or low or middle ground, to also express any concerns that you might have related to the particular application for staff to consider. Your role is not to make a recommendation for funding. This entire score sheet, that whole packet, that's what will be given to council. Council will make that determination of how they will fund, whether it's full funding for all, no funding for any, or somewhere in between, drawing a line, whatever that is the council's decision, and is not for you guys to set that threshold for what you will fund or what the council should fund. But this is being live streamed and recorded as a part of our record. You'll notice we have members of the public here with us today, and anyone online can, of course, review this. The final thing that I will share is that the purpose of today is to only discuss the applications and not the process. We will host a debriefing session, and where you will all be invited to say what worked well about the process, what needs to be improved about the process. I really appreciate Mr. Trembetta's comments on the previous one, saying we're still learning too. So as we mature, so will the process. And with your assistance in that, we'll be able to do that with those comments. You are also invited to submit your comments in writing so that we have those, but you are certainly not required to, but we certainly encourage it. Any other pieces about the process that I have? Oh, yes. Please take your document. This one, we forgot to write draft on it. So should you take it with you, if you could just write draft somewhere on the document so that we know that if it ever, kind of, as you take it with you, that's the draft, that is not the final. We will, in live time, even on the screen as we move forward, should edits be made, we will make those in live time. At the conclusion of this meeting, we will be posting the final scoring overview document for members of the public to download. With that, I would invite you to take up tab number 1. It says, it should be Carter's Corner Community Services. So tab number 1 was, oh yes, thank you. Thank you so much. We are going to start with tab 10, the Mount Olive Affordable Housing and Community Development Center. Page 2 for the summation points. Out of a potential 600 points, there was tab 10 scored 379 with an average of 63.17. The highest scoring in this category was an 82 by panelist number 4, Mr. Trombetta, the alternate, and the lowest scoring one was 40 points by panelist number 6, Mr. Hurley. At this point, I'd like to open up any questions or comments related to this particular application. Again, this is tab 10, Mount Olive Affordable Housing and CDC.
I had a policy question regarding the council's priorities. A significant part of this budget is to pay parents. And is that how the council wants to prioritize these funds? About 43% of this budget is direct payments to parents.
The priorities of the council are to directly help children, youth, and families. So as you're looking at the application, if you see that it is a direct help in that vein, then you score it accordingly. I say that because there can be incentive to get families, parents, children, youth to participate in a program, but it is up to the evaluator to determine if an incentive is in line with what the program is doing.
Thank you.
Any comments or questions about tab 10? This is also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I shared those concerns.
My notes indicated that as well.
So you have, this is your opportunity. You can ask each other questions here about particular things, or you can be like, wow, you scored really high, you scored really low. I'd like to know your reasoning. This is your opportunity to have that dialogue.
We haven't been allowed to talk to each other.
I know. I feel like I'm proud of you guys.
Eye contact.
This is that opportunity for those who participated in this, evaluating this applicant to have that discussion. Okay. Based on that, would anybody like to submit any revisions to their scores? Okay, so then there's no changes submitted to that one, it will stand. The next tab that we will encourage you to take up is tab, is it 29?
Yes.
29. This is Big Bend Minority Chamber of Commerce Foundation. At a potential 600 points, they scored 391 for an average of 65.17. The highest score for this one appears to be 85 with panelist number 5, Principal Smith. And then the lowest scoring one was a 40 from panelist number 4, Mr. Leland. Are there any comments or questions between and among panelists regarding tab 29?
Okay. So the only thing that I like, I don't have a problem with, but like $10,000 for QuickBooks. Then we buy computers for every participant. So my thing is, what I wanted to know in my mind was, is the computer gonna be a hindrance to the parents in a sense, because internet, whatever it takes to keep them to be able to activate this computer once they leave the program. So that was really the basis around, because I don't think that we as a community can put, even if a child do want a cell phone, computer, whatever we decide to do, if this would be a burden on the parent, then we actually hurting the family, not actually doing them no good. So I seen that, and $16,000 for instructions to come and speak. That's like, that was like crazy. So those was the issues that I had with.
Can you elaborate on that with the speakers? I'm not aware.
So if they're professional legal music is going, like, who are we?
Did we ask them about that?
No, we didn't.
So we didn't even flag that.
You did ask a question. You asked two questions. There was one about the participants, if there would be a preference given to, I think, members of their chamber. And you did ask if that money would go to members of their chamber as compensation for speaking. And I think their answer was no.
And I guess just from my perspective, when we think about the purpose of the chamber, when we're talking about the development of business, trade, to your question, in order for the children, from my perspective, and I see that my score was the standout on the higher end, but in order to make the investment of the children, they need to have the tools to be able to utilize them properly. And so I think sometimes when we talk about working with my takeaway was that this organization was willing to make an investment to ensure that every child that is participating has adequate tools that can be utilized and would be able to be utilized once the program concludes. And so when we talk about developing sort of that next generation of folks who are going to take our places, I think that there is no dollar amount, so to speak, that's unreasonable to ensure that they have what they need.
I have a question. Can you elaborate on the last question of the CSC Learning Evaluation Manual? Under the budget category, the last question is, does the applicant demonstrate evidence that the amount requested does not supplant existing funds?
And what do you mean by elaborate?
Can you just explain that as a concept?
So what it means is that the request is not for money that is already allocated to something else, or there is already a funding source for that cost. And what they want is to use our money to pay for that, and they'll take that money and pay for something else. So that's one concept. The other concept is if there are federal or state funds that are either available or in use, you cannot ask us for funding to put in there and then use that money for something else. So they're kind of two pieces to it.
But I guess they have in common using the funds in a way that is their intended purpose.
I didn't hear you.
I guess what they have in common though is that they're a financial control, right?
Yes, the idea is that CSC funding will enhance or create versus replace funding that's already existing.
And again, your role as evaluators were to use the information as presented as best possible. So that question really is about your confidence in what they presented is not supplanting or replacing existing or otherwise available funds for that particular line item.
It's kind of a general question that applies to more than one applicant, but some of the applications were missing some of the required attachments. Is it a correct assumption that if funded, the CSC would then say, you know, you really need to put in your insurance thing, or this insurance that you put in expires like in 4 weeks? I mean, I'm assuming that that's correct. Is that right?
Yes, our team should, so kind of after this step, it then goes to the council. The council, based on your input, will decide who should be moved forward into the next step of funding. Whether that's partial funding, all funding, exactly as presented or otherwise. It then comes back to staff to work with those individual applicants to ensure all of their required documentation is included. In addition to that, we actually are a named entity in the case of the insurance. And then finally, we do a very detailed budget audit to ensure that every line item is coded to the right line and that it's in compliance with our fiscal guidelines. So when you do that, and oftentimes that means adjustments in their budget or their allocations for where it might be. It will never go over what they asked for, but it may come under what they originally asked for based on those findings. With this discussion, because I know that we have 32 applications to get through, so we're not going to be able to dive super deep on every single one of them. This really is to kind of talk about, are there questions that you have specifically looking at the other scores of your panelists that you want clarified? And so given the discussion we've had here, I would like to ask, are there does anybody wish to revise their original scoring for tab number 29? If not, then we'll stay, and then we would like to thank Mr. Trivetta for serving as our alternate, and please excuse them should that be his desire.
How are you?
And signers very quickly.
We need you to sign your score. Your.
Oh, yeah.
You are.
Over. Well, thank you.
Thank you all.
Ms. Smith, I
Thank
think
you
you
so
had a
much.
question.
I just wanted to know if we were, I know that we'll be moving on to the next applicant, but I did want to register. That I think that one of the things that stood out most to me about this application, that I felt really strongly about was that the participants were going to receive a stipend. And so when we talk about programs that have multiple purposes, if we're talking about dealing with in some ways children who are dealing with issues such as generational poverty, the idea that there will be some development and exposure to fiscal responsibility at an early age is something that I think shouldn't miss the opportunity to have for children.
Appreciate that comment. With that, I will procedurally moving forward, we want to keep all comments because that comment could have influenced somebody else to say, hey, I want to change my score. So when we say, are there any more comments, right, before we get to the changing, I was trying, my apologies.
And with that comment, does anybody want to change?
For tab 29.
For tab 29.
Now we'll go back to tab 1, Carter's Corner Community Services. Total score of a 415 out of a possible 600 with an average score of a 69.17. The lowest ranking score for this application was a 57 by panelist number 2, Ms. Faison. And the highest scoring one was an 83 by Ms. Kamea. Is there any comments or questions from panelists or to panelists regarding this application? Hearing none. Would anybody like to make any revisions to their score that they submitted? Hearing none, we will move to tab 2, the Teenpreneur Foundation. They scored a 413 out of a potential 600, average score of a 68.83. Ms. Smith had the highest score of 100 and the lowest score from Mr. Hurley with a 50. So a 50-point spread on this one. Any comments or questions from our panelists or to our panelists?
Well, my only comment is, I have a problem with it.
How's the program?
That's almost 17 years, but additional activity, lawn service, you know what I'm saying? Like, that, to me, in my mind, you take that whole year. So that's, like, this is for someone, like, in almost all of them. Like, we're only talking 8 weeks, but we're giving out hundreds of thousands of dollars for positions, and only you make half of this, you know what I mean, in a couple months. So that was my only issue, because we paying almost $20,000 to house this program, 8 weeks.
Yeah, this is the applicant that I had asked about, essentially under the budget part of this, under professional fees, it says additional fees to increase security coverage of the facility, including but not limited to security cameras, Siamese cabling, power supply, etc. You know, my concern is that the CSC, the C stands for children. And I don't want the C to stand for churches. And, you know, I just feel like if you're in the kid business, whole concept of being willing to include infrastructure investments in nonprofits, being a part of this, I think we are left to consider what is that infrastructure for, and more importantly, who is it for? And when I look at this application, I see us, the who is a church and the what is security cameras. And I just can't, I heard one of the evaluators from the feeding, and they said, I just want to be able to defend this to my neighbor. And, I think that resonates with me. I wouldn't be able to defend giving $2,500 for security cameras at a church as part of this process. So that's why I rated them.
I think that in looking at the time in which the organizations have been in operation is something to consider as well. About where they might be able to utilize space. And I know that we I guess don't necessarily know as far as the space that's being used. I respect your comment about the space being a church, but could the issue be perhaps that they're utilizing a space that isn't normally utilized during the course of the normal week, which is why those costs might be attached to what this group is going to do.
Yeah. So as an example, they had a line item for the lease, like everyone does. If as a landlord, a church wants to say, like any entity, and they want to say, well, if you're gonna have kids here for insurance reasons, we need you to get cameras or whatever it is, they need to bake that into the lease as the landlord. But we're having an infrastructure investments on non-entities that are not in the kid business, and that is a reoccurring theme about a couple of these, certainly.
Based on this discussion, would anybody like to submit a revision to their score sheet? Going to note no changes for tab 2 and move to tab 3, Creative Minds Solutions. They scored a 480 points out of a potential 600 with an average score of 80. Again, the highest ranking score is 100 points from panelist 5, Principal Smith, and the lowest ranking score was a 64 from panelist 1, Ms. Tamaya. Any comments or questions from the panelists or to each other or to the panelists?
Just comment on it, several applications that it was a concern to me that the request for grant funds was almost 4 times the current operating budget of this entity. And I did not see a building of the capacity administratively to handle that much more money. And I mean, I understand that we're trying to build capacity in organizations, but that is a big stretch for an organization for a pretty short-term program. And so I think that was a concern for me, and that's reflected in my score.
And let me ask too, you all, the consideration that we have about how many days a week they're in, I want to make sure, because I'm sure that that's going to come up for a couple of the applicants. So I'd like it, if possible, for us to, if you all see that flagging it, the ones particularly that are only given like Monday or Friday, because I'm sure it'll come up for some, and I don't want us to be trying to reference them.
For clarity purposes, the training that we provided related to high quality standards for summer learning programs do say that have a whole section on what we call duration and dosage, or it might be dosage and duration. And in that kind of discussion, our preference is for a 5-day-a-week program with a minimum kind of expected of a 4-day-a-week program. So as you were reviewing, especially that proposal narrative, there's a section on, do you have confidence that they are meeting the expectations that we provided in training with them of duration and dosage of those minimum standards? I think, and teams, please correct me if I'm wrong, I think we said a minimum, the goal would be a 6-week program, 5 days a week for 8 hours a day, with the minimum kind of accepted of 4 weeks, 4 days a week, 6 hours. That is the standard that we set and where we are hoping to invest. So that was what the question reflected and should be reflected in your narrative scores.
And if the model dictated something different from that, they were to explain why they would be doing something different from those recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I looked at a lot of these was how many days a week did they do and how many hours? Did they target the zip codes? Was it free to the families involved? And beyond that, on a sort of budgetary level of did anything really stick out as far as any particular expense? But the reason I ask is because that consideration, although I do not see it asked as a specific question within the proposal narrative category, is that where that would, you were imagining that consideration to be placed?
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the things I liked about this application was the junior counselors program, giving stipends to teens to work and earn, learn about employment and responsibility and also earn some money over the summer. And I like that piece.
Any additional comments or questions for tab 3? Based on this conversation and discussion, would anybody like to submit a revision to their score sheet? Hearing none, we will move to the next tab, tab 4. You'll note that there's a star on this one, and that was to indicate any of those that are starred had originally submitted 2 separate applications. And given the confusing nature of the feeding versus learning, we did permit each of the individuals who did that to go back and provide additional kind of clarity to their budget. So this one was one who will not have a printout in your book, but the additional information was provided in their tab. And so I just wanted to kind of point that out so that their amount requested did alter from their original service line 1 to be inclusive of the feeding component. Based on that, the total score was 476 out of a potential 600 with an average score of 79.33. Principal Smith had the highest score of 100 points. Mr. Hurley, again, I say again, because both of you had the highest and the lowest. So the spread was a 45-point spread from 55 points for Mr. Hurley and 100 points for Principal Smith. Any comments or questions from the panelists or to each other?
I have a question on this. Sorry. I have a question on this, and I don't know if it was because I wasn't a careful reader. It was not clear to me if campers attended 1 week of the camp's offerings or if they attended 5 weeks of the camp offerings. I interpreted it that they were attending 1 of the 5 weeks that the camp was available, partly because of the special needs kids going, but that does not meet your duration standards.
So that was a question that was clarified during the presentation day 2
That I missed.
that you missed. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the answer to the question was, it is a Sunday to Friday camp. And most will attend for 1 week out of the 5 weeks, but there could be some that will attend 2 weeks out of the 5 weeks.
Well, and given the target population for this, that seems appropriate. It would not seem appropriate based on my knowledge of the population they're serving, that they be away from home for 5 weeks. But it raises the question of how you define your duration stuff, because it doesn't technically meet your duration minimum requirements.
But let me say this, I think that it is up to the evaluator to look at the program, who the program is serving. If there are, like we said before, I don't want to say mitigating circumstances, but reasons why it would be a different duration. For you to score that accordingly. I also believe in this particular case, this is a sleepaway camp. So it is 24/7 for 6 days. And I just want to bring that up because that may play into your scoring.
Well,
and for children who are disabled developmentally and or physically.
I mean, gave this program a strong score because I believe in the work they're doing and the need of the target population. But it was because of who they're serving, it didn't quite fit the minimum parameters.
I have on here missing narrative, did not follow directions by submitting 2 separate budgets. Did they resolve that?
They did resolve that,
Yeah, and so,
and that information was included in the online version. So they did, and they did meet it within the required deadline. So, and that, again, not printed in your book, but available digitally. So that may or may not weigh in your decision. Any additional questions or comments?
My score was a strong score as well. This is a program that's catered to supporting some of those vulnerable children that we have in our community. Those children are often in different franchise. Their parents may not have out of school supports, and feel like this is a strong offering and much needed for children that are sometimes unfortunately discounted.
Any additional comments or questions? Would anyone like to submit a revision to their score sheet based on this discussion?
Can I move my can I go from 18 to 20, 40 to 45? And 15.
I don't see a 10.
Don't see a 10.
Yeah, 20.
20.
The budget.
Oh, my bad, 20 to 25.
Okay, let the record reflect that panelist number 4, Mr. Had it backwards at the top. Sorry. No, that's all right. No, Mr. Leland, sorry. For column number 1, 20 points, column number 2, 45 points, column number 3, 25 points. Any other revisions to line item? Well, I'll get to that.
Gotcha. Sorry.
Would anybody else like to submit any revisions for tab 4? Hearing none, the new total score for line item 4 is 488 points for an average of 81.33.
What is his?
Oh, so sorry,
That's what I
90.
was talking
And thank you.
That's
I'll make
okay.
sure I do that in the future. The new total for panelist score is 90.
about. And the final score, 488.
488.
Percentage.
81.33. We will move to tab number 5, Boys and Girls Club of the Big Bend. They scored a 506 points out of a potential 600 for an average score of an 84.33. The highest score was panelist number 5, Principal Smith, with 100 points. The lowest score was panelist number 4, Mr. Leland, with a 66. Are there any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists?
So I think Boys and Girls Club is a great entity in our community. But still at $66,000 for salary, you know what I'm saying? Plus, y'all already did, y'all a national organization. You know what I'm saying? So, and when I look at what y'all gonna be doing for the summer, I got $5,000 for daily travel, $7,000 for instructional program. So it's kind of like y'all top heavy on administrative, but the programming, and I don't see that. I don't see that they budgeted for what they, I know what they do, but I don't see it reflecting their numbers as what they do, like trips. That ain't, I mean, the biggest city, that's what it look like from the quick.
Any additional comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists? Would anyone care to change their scores based on this discussion? Hearing none, we will move to tab 6, the Big Bend Homeless Coalition. They had a total score of 508 points out of a potential 600 for an average of 84.67. The highest score was 100 points from Principal Smith. The lowest score was a 66. Am I on the same line? Okay, that's right. It was a 66 from Mr. Leland. Any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists? Hearing none, would anybody like to submit any changes to their score sheet? We'll move to tab 7, the PACE Center for Girls. They scored 490 points out of a potential 600 for an average of an 81.67. I feel like I'm a little bit in the twilight zone because I will say again that the highest score was 100 points from Principal Smith. The lowest score was a 66 from Mr. Leland. Any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists?
I think, again, I'm looking at, I don't know, I gotta go see how much you get paid for someone out there, but that's where I'm at in the salary, from 18. All this, like, that's where I'm at. But, like, I don't know, but I mean, like, from what I'm saying, $78,000 for staffing for the summer is like that. I don't have no arm around.
They only asked for 50,000,
Oh, okay.
so I'm not sure.
It says,
I think that's their, is that their annual, like their
it says
annual budget?
23 is on the academic enrichment program budget. Basic girls, we are, man. I'm looking at her. The letter of recommendation.
You're saying you see 50 for salary costs?
No, that's, he was saying he saw 70 something, they only asked for 50.
So what's the number?
And what I'm looking at is a total of 78,600, 1,800 for office staff, 72,000 for teachers and students, and 2,400 for enrichment activity facilitators, and 2,400 for manager on site.
I guess the piece that I like to offer is I know that you've been concerned about the salaries more than once, but we're talking about during a time where there's a teachers shortage across the district. Is organizations trying to get people who don't normally work during the summer and quite honestly have been working through just a tremendously difficult time in educating children since the pandemic. So I think that when organizations are looking to get teachers to come out, that in some ways we have to be sure that we're compensating them for their time, their professional expertise in the same way as we would for any other professional, understanding that for a large percentage of teachers, they are electing to not work during the summer because the school year itself has been so stressful. So there are organizations that are putting forth efforts to compensate teachers to be sure that the children that are, the folks that are working with our children are qualified professionals. I think that that's something that is reasonable.
Yeah, I don't really ideologically have a problem with a high salary percentage. It's really just about what are their costs. And I mean, that labor is obviously always going to be a big cost driver, but just so we're all on the same page and I'm open to just being on the same page. What is this? The 78 number is for their whole program. They're asking for 50. So it's really not this, the 78 is the cost of the whole program. Is that right?
Oh, that's I'm reading it wrong. If I'm reading it wrong, y'all need, let me know.
Yeah.
But that's just my issue. Like, I don't think even 12 weeks. That's where I'm at.
So I know that you're looking at this.
Right. That's fine. That's all I can go by. What else I can go by? Ain't got nothing else to go by.
So what was she confused about then? She was saying that there are only 50 totals.
Ms. Lauren was saying that they only asked for 50. Mr. Whitfield, I almost said Mr. Leland. Mr. Leland.
Mr. Bubba.
Yeah, Mr. Hubba is saying that when he's looking at the program budget, I don't have it in front of me, that it's saying 78,000 in salaries and it's expressing his opinion.
So did they not even include a budget then?
I'm just going by what-
Yeah, I see it. Now you got me confused.
We're gonna do a quick little look over here and see if we got two budgets or just the one. Actually, we in the Holly sense of the word.
While we're doing that, I realize that this program is longer weeks than the minimum, but it needs 3 days a week, 4 hours a day. So I still don't think it's coming in at the duration level that you
Yeah.
were asking.
Yeah, definitely, you're right. Yeah, it says identify which days of the week the program will be offered. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday. How many hours per day will the proposed program be available for?
And they're operating longer weeks. They're operating 12 weeks instead of 8. But I'm not sure the math works out there in terms of the duration.
So I would like to clarify that what they requested under the project budget in their application was $50,000. That is what they input saying we would like 50,000. You are not incorrect that when you reflect on the grant that they submitted with their application, the total request was $155,000. I can report to you what was shared and what was included in the application and let you know that what they said their request was for was one number and what they submitted in their budget was another number. And it is your responsibility as evaluators to judge the budget
And that's what
accordingly.
No, you caught this and nobody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right.
Well, and you guys started looking at the math then too. I mean, this totally changes their cost per child as well. And look at the amount requested column. That's now incorrect.
I'm all for it, I
Right.
love school, but
Yeah.
like, let's make this make sense. Like,
So what's the number? They've asked for 50,000 and that's what.
The
it says
application
in the
says
application.
$50,000 and their budget says
If we give them $50,000,
$155,000.
but it's gonna cost them $155,000 to do it, that's not gonna work.
And I wish we would
Good catch.
realize this sooner. Look, I mean, the very rigid procurement take would be to just disqualify them. That
I don't
isn't
think we could do that.
I think we
Well,
need to change
you
it.
could.
I want to change it.
Zero.
Yeah,
Make
but I don't
I mean,
think
at the minimum on the budget category.
Yeah.
If this was someone you were doing business with and you had this realization when you're in the check writing phase,
Right.
this would make you reevaluate the terms of.
So we can offer you that we will do an extensive budget audit for everyone who is selected by the council to move forward. Under those circumstances, should they have calculated something incorrectly, we will work with them. We will not increase their allocation. We would only decrease their allocation. So in terms of conducting that audit, should they have
So let me,
However,
Can
let me add, what she's saying is absolutely correct. However, given that the request was one thing
and
and the budget showed a different thing,
this question,
you all's responsibility is to judge that and score that accordingly.
but let me ask you this, so they can't, they will only be able to get what they requested, not what the budget say, right?
what their request
What's
was.
the request?
Okay, cool. I'll change my vote then.
And what are you gonna do?
Okay, so based on this discussion, I will formally,
The program is great. But my concern was, when I was reading, they didn't have a job, but if they could only get the request that they asked for, then I'm all for it, like I'm going to raise it.
If they move forward, if they score out
Okay, yeah,
and move forward to the council saying, offer them an award, they will only be eligible for the number that was put in the application.
okay.
That is all they would be eligible to receive, and they can make a decision whether they want to move forward with that or not move forward with that.
Because their intent may have been, they're only asking us for a portion of their costs and they have other funds. We don't know that because.
And look, I mean, as far as our discretion as evaluators, I do think that, you know, these are very difficult processes, and I think generally this has been a good process. That being said, it puts us in a difficult spot, you know, to sit here and where do you draw the line of someone who's responsive or not? You know, I did zero an applicant because I thought they were just not responsive. You know, Holly sitting here and writing, you know, one of these applicants, know this, know that, wrong form, none of this, and it's a long list. It's a longer list of what people got wrong sometimes and what they got right. You know, I would encourage you all to use your discretion, because somebody's got to use their discretion throughout this process, right? Their job is done now. The council is really probably going to approve a big train of applicants, and so the time to come in with the scalpel is actually right now. It's not, you know, when it's in front of the council on it. And so if you feel like an applicant has not submitted what they need to, I think at some point we got to figure out what's responsive and not.
Based on this discussion, would anyone like to submit revisions to their score for tab 7?
Yes, can I move
Wait.
my 10 to a 25, please?
Noted, your new total is 81. Are there additional revisions that panelists would like to make?
I also wanted to just flag that I really appreciate the size of their program. This is a larger program than others.
Any other comments or revisions to your submitted scores? Hearing none, the new total is 505 points for an average of 84.17. We will now take up tab number 9, Bethel Christian Academy. Again, I'll note the star that they were one of the applicants who were afforded that secondary step due to the confusing application process, who did submit revised documents provided for you in your document. On the overview, that is the budget that they did request. And if I remember correctly on this one, they always had it combined in their budget.
So it's
No, that what you see is what was there, but they did submit some other elements that were made available on the online version. The total score points that they earned was 456 for an average of 76. The highest scoring was actually tied between two of our panelists at 90 points between Ms. Kamea and Principal Smith. And our lowest scorer was panelist number 6, Mr. Hurley, with 42 points. Are there any questions or comments from our panelists or to each other about this tab?
The reason I rated them poorly is because I have concerns about really two issues. One is that this is a very church-centered application. This is an entity with a majority of their entities are religious in nature, and I think that, you know, the questions that I asked them did not necessarily reassure the most confidence that related to the kinds of students that they take. My second concern is a financial one, which is that under the advertising section, they've got a $10,000 line item for advertising this. You know, that just is not square as a percentage of their overall budget with how much they're spending on advertising. And of additional concern is one of the entities that's getting paid that advertising dollars is an entity that they themselves own and operate, the Capital Outlook. I can't in good conscience support that applicant. To my neighbors, when I ask, what did you do with this money? I can't have the answer be, gave it to, radio station and newspaper. That I'm concerned about that.
Any additional comments or questions from our panelists?
I was just going to ask with your concern about the use of the church, and I appreciate you sharing that with us very directly. And looking at the zip codes for which the programs are going to operate, do you make any considerations about what other spaces might be available in those zip codes for programs based on their size, and whether or not organizations are simply perhaps in the spaces that are available to them based on where the programs are going to be offered?
Right. So another example of this is as a line item under transportation costs. It appears to me, I mean, the applicant's not in front of me, but it appears to me that they're renting vans from themselves. There's a number of issues. What do you have any comment about the issue of the advertising? It's a percentage.
Well, that part wasn't concerning to talk just because you mentioned the part about the church. And then I guess based on where the zip codes are, the accessibility of the participants to such spaces based on where they live. A large percentage of the students and families, sometimes in some of these zip codes don't necessarily have transportation or reliable transportation. And so accessing spaces that are available to them, I think is something to be considered as well. Although I respect your right to feel the way that you do about the use of the type space. I just wanted to offer that from my perspective as a point of consideration.
And I'm just made this comment, like I hear what you're saying, Max. And feel it, and I mean, I live in 66. But to your comment that I can't be mad with the church if the church on a newspaper, a building like Bethel owns almost 15% of Freetown. So in the space that they serve in, I mean, if you thought about that, you want to come do something on the church, like even if the church is doing something, they charge members of the church to do their thing. I get what you're saying, and it brought a red flag to me, but I want to actually give it another look. Like, I mean, if I'm gonna run something and I got the space, now don't get me wrong, I do think the advertisement should have been down a little bit, and I maybe should have put in for gas for my bands and maintenance. But at the end of the day, they own it and they just treat it like a business with their program. That's how I look at it.
I agree with you that they're treating it like a business. Right. My concern is that it's the business of the church and not the kids in this case.
Well, I mean, my thing is that they treat it like a business. Can't be mad because most people do that sometimes. My thing is that who they serve, and I rate them a 66 because of those same reasons, but I don't want people to think that, I don't really see nothing wrong with it, but for this process, who they serve.
And their cost per cow is pretty low.
Right.
Comparatively.
Right.
So they're subsidizing it somehow. That's pretty low cost.
So I just want to clarify that. You got to think in their spaces they work in, they own pretty much everything around. So,
any additional questions or comments related to tab 9?
I'd like to change my budget score to 20.
Okay. Let the record reflect panelist number 1 switching her budget score to a 20, bringing her total to an 83. Are there additional revisions requested by panelists? Hearing none, this brings their new total to a 449, with an average score of a 74.83. We will now take up.
Just a quick process question. So I know we said it was gonna be 90 minutes. We're in 2 hours now. It's the intent to push through because I'm not even a third of the, I mean, I have a
So-
meeting, I have to be out at 12:30, so I'm just
I
asking. I don't wanna be
completely
rude and
understand
not
and
committed that process, but I did a lot for all day.
I do want to try to encourage you that if you have questions or comments, to make them quickly. And that if you want to make changes, note that so that we can kind of speed the process, but we will follow the process as it is.
You're gonna keep forging ahead.
So we'll take up tab 12. So based on tab 12, we have a total score of 455 points with an average of a 75.83. The highest score was a 95 from panelist 6, Mr. Hurley. The lowest score was a 61 from panelist 4, Mr. Leland. Any comments or questions from the panelists?
I'm sorry, we're on tab.
We're on tab 12. We already did tab 10.
I think it's incredible that they are gonna be in a position to serve more kids, if I'm correct here, than the foundation for Leon County Schools. And that's not a burn on Leon County Schools. It's just that they've really grown a program that is gonna host an impressive amount of kids.
And it was nice to see that FAMU was giving them the space and time.
I completely agree with you.
Any additional comments or questions regarding tab 12? Any revisions that you'd like to make for any scores? Hearing none, we will take up tab 13, Young Engineers Tallahassee. You'll notice the star on this, equating to the recension of application 2 for feeding and rolling it into that for a new total request of 222,000 and some change. The total score awarded was 415 points out of 600 for an average of a 69.17. The highest being 90 points from panelist 6, Mr. Hurley, and the lowest being 46 from panelist 2, Ms. Faison. Any comments or questions regarding tab 13?
So unless I understood it incorrectly, there was gonna be fees for the families, and only 15 children would be scholarships. So that's why I scored it a little bit low. So I think the cost per child, so that's just the cost per child, that, and those are not free children, that is what's on top of the fees the parents are being charged. There was only $50,000 or 15, what was it? 15 children would be scholarships, and there was no transportation.
Any additional comments or questions regarding tab 13?
Yeah, I think I wondered. So what is their, I'm just flipping through it, trying to find, what is their cost per kid?
Based on the calculation, it
Like, what is their cost for the parent?
It's 100 and. I don't know, it's 195.
Oh, it was-
5 a week or something like that. Is that correct? $195 a week. So they're still gonna be charged that and they're getting $100,000.
Yeah, that was the only, I really like their application other than that.
based on this discussion, would anyone like to revise their scores?
It's 12.
Pardon? This is tab 13.
13.
Yes, sir. Hearing none, we will move to tab 15, B Sharp's Jazz Society. Okay, sorry. The total score for this was 323 out of a possible 600, bringing the average score to 53.83. The highest score for this one was from panelist number 1, Ms. Kamea at 66 points. The lowest was at 43 from panelist 3, Ms. Zinni, who's not with us today. Any questions or comments regarding this particular application?
You know, this is one of the, I think, 3 total applicants that I give a 0 for budget. I like what they're doing, but their costs are just so out of control. There just has to be a better way that we can cheaper, more students into the program.
Any additional comments or questions regarding this application? Would anybody like to submit a revision to their score? Hearing none, we will move to tab 16, the Achieve Academy. Their total score was 410 points out of a potential 600. Their average is 68.33. Their highest ranking score was from panelist number 3, Ms. Denny, who is not with us, with an 87 points. The lowest was from Mr. Hurley at a 50. Any comments or questions regarding this application? Would anybody like to submit revisions to their score sheet? Hearing none, we'll take up tab 18, Foundation for Leon County Schools. Their total score was a 520 out of 600 possible points for an average rating of an 86.67. Their two highest, they're tied for their highest score of a 97 points for panelists number 1 and 2, Ms. Kamea and Ms. Faison. The lowest score for this one was from Mr. Leland with 66 points. Would any of our panelists like to pose questions or make comments to one another? I just switched up my, sorry about that. Are there any questions or comments from the panelists to each other or to the group? Hearing none, would anyone like?
Well, and I really am sorry. I think that would you mind voluntarily agreeing to strike your scores for this applicant? My concern is really because she worked for Leon County Schools, right? And I don't want that to be a source of scrutiny. And I can totally imagine this being a source of scrutiny. Because I don't think it's going to affect the outcome of this anyways. Does that not seem to be a reasonable thing to do?
So from my perspective, it's not necessary. And the reason I say that is because Dr. Smith works for Leon County Schools.
Right.
This is the foundation.
Right.
So I don't see where it's necessary. However, that is a request you can make and she can make a decision. It is not something we are going to opine or require.
Right.
And we thought it was a conflict, we would have asked for that.
And if I may try to depersonalize this about you, I just think that part of our job is to make this as above board and good and not just on reality, because we know reality, but I think the optics of it. I just think it's best to be totally unimpeccable, on that and just add a total abundance of caution.
So let me offer this. With that in mind, would you also believe that our council members should recuse himself? Because the superintendent sits on our council.
Interesting question. Have they in the past?
And the school board member sits on the council.
Have they in the past?
Excuse me?
You raise an interesting question. Have they in the past? I'm just asking.
We've only had one funding cycle, and that was last summer. Councilmember Jones was not present for that. And as far as I can remember, Councilmember Hannah did vote on the final approval.
And I really like.
And I'm not criticizing, I'm throwing it out there.
I do just want.
That's all I'm saying.
I do just want y'all to see my heart, which is that I just want this to be as totally good and immune from scrutiny as possible. That being said, to play pretend lawyer for a second, ethics laws do make a big distinction about specific benefit. And when you have a board member, or Rocky or school board member Jones, they are voting on a package of groups, right? So the conflict gets dispersed.
Maybe not.
When you have a specific evaluator and then the specific applicant, there's a much more direct.
But let me go back.
Mhm.
You're assuming that they're going to take them all, that they're going to approve in a group. They could very easily decide
Yeah.
they want to approve one by one. So I just don't know that.
And I bet you
that
if
is-
they did, they'd recuse themselves.
Maybe, maybe not. I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay, I thought it might be an easy thing to say, hey, great point, great flag, let's just make that easy, but it's okay. I don't want to waste time, so I know that our time's out, okay?
It's a request and
Well, and I guess the only thing that I would say is to reiterate what's been shared. I'm an employee of the school district. I'm not an employee of the foundation. And should I ever seek funds from the foundation, I'd have to apply for them just as any other person. So I felt that there was some separation there.
Any additional comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists regarding tab 18? Would any of our panelists like to make a revision to their score sheet?
And just for full disclosure, at that time, we also had Principal Connor on the council and she voted. So I just want to make sure I give you the whole picture as you absolutely have the right to feel that way. And I want to make sure for the record that I'm not egging it one way or the other. I just wanted to throw the scenarios out there so that there could be perspective on whatever decisions were made.
I think you raised an important point, and it applies not only in this process, but also to the council as well, and maybe needs to be addressed at kind of a higher level than here.
Hearing no further discussion on tab 18.
Before you move forward, stays on, it is 12:15.
It's okay. I told my late.
Okay,
We will take up tab 19,
okay.
Dream Builders Greatness Center. With a total point of 381 points out of 600 for an average of 63.5. The highest score for this line came in from panelist number 2, Ms. Faison at 83, with the lowest coming from panelist number 6, Mr. Hurley at 30. 53 point spread. Are there any comments or questions from the panelists?
So you have on here, the 990, this is not the file requested.
That is correct. So we requested a copy of their current operating budget, but would accept a profit and loss statement, an annual profit and loss statement, or a copy of their 990. Some entities interpreted that and submitted a photocopy of the postcard that it had been received and did not actually provide the 990. I will entertain Mr. Leland's, I know we haven't engaged in discussion yet, but that's okay. If you would like to submit your revisions to your changes, I will note them now.
After I went back and saw them there last night, I looked at it, so I wanna go to 20 from 18 on the, that is the
Other experience one, the first column, yes, sir.
45 on that. I wanna give them 50 on it.
50 on their narrative. So noted. Any additional revisions? Your new total would come in 88. Are there any other, is there any discussions, questions, or anyone who would like to submit a revision to their score? On tab 19. Based on this, the new total for this line is 393 points for an average of 65.5. We will now take up 20, Divine Healthcare Consulting, doing business as SG Mental Health Counseling. Their total score is 420 points out of a potential 600 with an average score of 70. The highest coming from panelist number 5, Principal Smith, And the lowest coming from Mr. Hurley, panelist 6 with 30 points. So a 70-point spread for this one. Would any of our panelists like to make any comments or questions to the panelists or from?
This is the note for council members, depending on where their cutoff points are. You have two providers that are using the exact same community facility. That depending on funding decisions, you'll need to figure that out.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Again, to each other or from one another, I mean, or just for the record.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as we evaluate them and their budget, we should consider what do the dollars, who has the thing of value, the capital expense, and who do they serve? You know, when we buy 15 laptops, what happens after summer? I think clearly the answer is the awardees keep all of that stuff, and I think we ought to consider who that is and what type of entity they do and what business they're in.
Based on this discussion, would any of our panelists like to revise their scores?
I want to revise the narrative score from a 50 to a 40, please.
Let the record show. Panelist number 5, you said from the narrative from a 50 to a 40?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Any other revision, Principal Smith?
No.
That brings your total score to a 90. Are there any additional revisions for tab 20? The new total score for this line item is 410 with an average of a 68.3. We will now take up tab 21, Tallahassee Nights Live Performing Arts Foundation Incorporated. Please note the star that this was a combined application. Their total points are 438 points out of 600 for an average of 73. The highest score comes in from panelist number 2, Ms. Faison, with 73 points. The lowest comes in at 65 from panelist number 3, Ms. Denny. Oh, I'm so sorry. I do apologize. Yep, thank you. The top score, it was 70, what, 85? 85 from Principal Smith?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, what did I say?
75 from somebody.
Oh, okay, my apologies. 85 from Principal Smith. And then the lowest was a 65 from Miss Denny. Any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists? Hearing none, we will move to tab 23, the Reach One Youth Organization. The points are the same for this one, 438 with an average of 73. See if I do my math right correctly this time. Our highest score was an 81 from Miss Faison, and our lowest score in this category was a 68 from Mr. Leland. Any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists? Hearing none, would anybody like to submit a revision to tab 23 on their score sheet? We will take up tab 24, She Academy Incorporated. They received a total score of 403 points with an average of a 67.17. The highest score comes in at 80 points from panelist number 5, Principal Smith. The lowest score is a 43 from panelist number 6, Mr. Hurley. Are there any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists?
I thought the food plan in this application was reliant on donations and board member sponsorships too much. Some grant funds were set aside, but particularly because they had the option to apply for food support for this program, that seemed a particularly weak element of this application.
Any additional comments or questions from the panelists? Would anyone care to revise their score for tab 24? Hearing none, we'll take up tab 25, Citizens for a Sustainable Future Incorporated. The total points awarded were 457 out of a possible 600 for an average of 76.17. The highest score here was a 95 from panelist number 6, Mr. Hurley. The lowest was a 66 from panelist number 2, Ms. Faison. Are there any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists?
I do want to. When I go from 40 to 50, and from 18 to 20.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Leland has changed his score for the experience category to a 20 and to the proposal narrative to a 50, bringing his total score to an 85. Are there additional revisions to score sheets from the panelists? Let the record show that the new total for this tab is 469 with an average of a 78.17. Again, this is tab 25. We will now take up tab 26, Phenomenal Trusses LLC. Please note for the record that this also was a combined application. The new total is 175,875. That includes the feeding component. Their total points awarded were 331 out of a potential 600 for an average of a 55.17. The highest score was an 84 from panelist number 2, Ms. Faison. The lowest score was a 35 from panelist number 4, Mr. Leland. Are there any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists?
This is a very interesting concept to me. I think it was a good option to see if the CSC could partner this organization to someone who could do the other part of your initiative. They had access, they had a particular focus for what they do. They're a salon basically, but they were not the strongest applicant for the literacy and other goals, but if they had partnered with someone else, they could have been like one whole thing. But they didn't score well on their own.
I agree. I think that they're a great example of an applicant who would be better suited to something that was more like a couple groups coming together.
So where I had a problem, everything come back to the budget, but let me be clear, like the program in itself for the people, for the individuals that she's serving, that's what most of them into anyway. That's like what she's doing is great. You know what I'm saying? Because you got, I seen a 7-year-old right now, but like in my mind, for what you're asking for, am I just gonna put your whole salon together, a whole crew together with that's what's in my mind by looking at our budget. So that's why I scored the way I scored it, but not saying that it's not a program that we don't need because we do need it. Right?
But they needed another partner who could have done the other. I mean, if you think about hair care stuff, you got math, you got science, you got literacy. I mean, there was a whole nother part that if they had worked with someone else, it could have been a very innovative, interesting concept while providing direct services to girls and self-esteem stuff and whatever, but they didn't do that, but interesting idea.
We had a lot of camps that talked about entrepreneurship, and that's what I liked about this, and the cost per title was actually pretty low.
Yeah, it just was, they spoke to their strength and they needed to reach out to balance that with some other people in my mind.
I agree. I thought that the concept and what was being, or what would potentially be offered to participants was worthwhile. I had some just similar concerns about the utilization of the space and whether or not in her capacity, the actual salon would be shut down for this to this program to be operational, or whether the two will be happening in conjunction with each other, and just some concerns about the piece with the private bus transportation.
Yeah, no, I think that we've raised this on a number of applications that they're not really in the kid business. It's a nice idea. And I would encourage everyone to I hope that I am certainly gonna send a couple ideas to the CSC after all of this. And one of them, this reminds me of, which I know that y'all are understaffed, but I love the idea of being able to give a place for some of these people who have a great idea and a great kind of elective class for summer camp, but maybe not, every other piece of it. And everyone can't do everything,
And I don't know if it is out of order. I know that we didn't look at the feeding component, but I did want to share in looking at the zip code in which the students are going to be served, that as we make considerations about issues surrounding obesity, that the menu for the summer was mostly things that are not nutritional in nature.
It's totally in the purview of reviewing this application, as feeding was a required component. Based on this discussion, is there anyone who would like to revise their scores for tab 26, phenomenal presses?
I want to see what was junk food in here.
Flip to that tab. And the rest of us will move on. We're going to take up tab 27, Brownsville Preparatory Institute. They had a potential 502 points and a potential 600 for an average score of 83.67. The highest ranking score was a 100 from panelist number 5, Principal Smith. The lowest ranking score was a 69 from panelist number 1, Ms. Kubea. Are there any discussion, comments, or questions from the panelists or to the panelists?
I think this summer part is a great piece of the project. Only because of where they're going to get kids. So she specifically said retirement Jolo there. Those are some of the kids that go grind, which needs a great boost. And Brownsville has the history and the record to making sure this happens. So, like I gave it 80, I think. I don't think anybody. I support it on a wholeheartedly.
Thanks for pointing out those. I completely understand it, but I also understand that that work could be shifted in a different direction over the summer. So the idea that she would work to support children, when we're talking about a school where you were the 25% of the children are reading efficiently, I think it's an investment that's worthwhile to make.
Yeah, I really like their application. My only real issue, and I give them an 80, is that I want to make sure I get this right. Their application essentially 100% subsidizes a small number of kids and about 20% subsidizes the rest of the kids, right? It's like the fees go from like $750 to $590 or something like that for 80% of the kids. When we talked about that, she said something like, well, it's a really popular summer camp, so kids naturally get reserved like a year out. That's understandable this year. I hope that if they get funding, though, that ideally I'd like in subsequent years to be in a situation where we can 100% fund. I just don't really like this idea of partially subsidizing.
Based on this discussion, would anybody like to submit a revised score for tab 28? Excuse me, 27. I apologize. 27. I wrote 28. It clearly says 27. We'll now take up tab 30. 30 is AMI Kids Tallahassee. There's a double star here to inform the panelists that they submitted 2 applications, one for feeding and one for learning. Everyone who submitted 2 applications did confirm whether or not they intended to really truly only do one. In this case, it was separate. So their request for the 21,450 remains. The total point awarded is 423 for an average of a 70.5. The highest score being a 95 from panelist number 5, Principal Smith, and the lowest score being a 38 from panelist number 4, Mr. Leland. Are there any comments or questions regarding this tab?
Yeah, okay, so. Like, I understand what they were doing, I looked at it, but, and everything that they're requesting, and because I did this, I used to have a business. It seemed to me, just to me, is that we spend in almost $20,000 in equipment. They requested $20,000 on equipment just for the summer. You know what I'm saying? So my thing is, and because I know the business is like for 8 weeks to serve, how many kids they said they were serving? 30 kids. 40 kids, like, and knowing the prices of these equipment that they're asking for, I'm shocked. Like, you don't need, like, in my mind, knowing that, and that's why I grade them so low, is because in my mind, y'all elevate to another business outside of it, and that's not what our tax dollars are for.
Is this one of the ones that had an updated budget that wasn't included in here?
I mean, they were offered, but the budget that they submitted, they said it was 2 separate items.
Well, help me understand though, I'm on tab 30 and my kids, the sheet I have shows them only basically having a request of 11,000 looking at the budget.
That's tab 2. I mean, that's service line 2.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I see.
And did they resubmit their menu?
You have, I'll double check to see if
I'm just asking because, like, a lot of, like, I mean, not saying that this is not, and I don't have a concept of, that's why I did.
Well, let's walk through your concern. You said, that the concern is that what happens to the equipment. I agree with you, it's a lot of equipment costs, but what is the fear? I mean, aren't they a bona fide nonprofit in the kid business?
Yes, I don't think that's the conversation for me, you can have it.
Well, but I'm asking, and my kids' organizations and their.
If you want my person,
Hey,
I have to go by the application, that's what I'm going by the application. And I'm basing off of what they're saying they're gonna do with these kids. From what I'm reading, the design first. For 40 kids, designing shirts and they're running the t-shirt business. $20,000, that's like.
I guess I just asked because I like your point. I don't know if it applies here though, because here, think about how, compared to if they were, say, Ron John's t-shirt shop and they were applying for Ron John's t-shirt shop summer camp. And they were buying a heat press or buying a vinyl press, we go, wait, what happened to all the kids' money? We gave it to Ron John's t-shirt company. There's not really a for-profit company unless I'm mistaken.
Did you go back and research the organization?
No, I didn't. I'm just saying they are a kids business. And they are a nonprofit that works for Kids Space. Unless I'm mistaken about is there a for-profit business involved in all this? Because
They did say in their presentation that the kids would sell the shirts. That was what they said.
I like that there was all they were asking for is equipment. They're not paying for their space, their van, their salaries, and the very low cost per child. Thought it was a different approach.
Is there any additional comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists?
Was there anything in there or is there anything? What is there, when you guys write these checks and they say, okay, this is what we're gonna spend it on.
is there anything in there that says, obviously you can't take the laptop and make it your own property and you can't, sell them and give them to a for-profit business? I mean, this is just like for.
Sorry, I think it's it's absolutely a valid question. So if you go back, first of all, finish your question if I interrupt.
No, I guess I understand that you could be committing fraud or a crime, and then it's sort of law enforcement's job as a nonprofit to figure out that. But aside from a criminal offense, there is some kind of contract at some point in this grant process. They're going to sign a piece of paper saying, yep, we promise to do with the money as we said, and we will maintain possession of this property.
So in our community investment partner guidelines, there is information regarding anything that is purchased with CSC funds. And to summarize it, it basically says that it is the property of CSC. And if for some reason the program for which that equipment was purchased goes dormant, I think it's 2 years. I think it's 2 years. It's something like that. It goes dormant, then CSC reserves the right to take that equipment and move it to another program that is doing either the same or similar work. So that is kind of how we cover that in the guidelines. And so in their contract, that same information, because they say that they will abide by the guidelines in the CIP. So if for some reason we fund and there's equipment bought, whether it is a laptop, now I think it's a little different if it's a equipment that goes with the participant.
Yeah.
But if it's equipment that stays with the organization, and let's say something happens and the organization goes out of business within 2 years, then we can ask for that equipment back and we can recycle it to another.
And I understand too, y'all are not going to be revoed.
That being said, though, we'll be doing contract monitoring, so we can kind of know.
It provides a point of leverage for you all to make sure that they're in compliance with the rest of the contract, and that's why I asked.
Yes.
That was my only concern.
So based on this discussion, would anybody like to revise their scores for tab 30? Hearing none, we will now take up tab 31, Girls to Divas Incorporated. They've received 411 points out of a total of 600 possible, with an average of a 68.5. The highest score came from panelist number 2, 91 points from Ms. Faison. The lowest score is a 45 from panelist number 6, Mr. Hurley. Are there any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists?
I ask you a question. Why you score them so low? I'm just asking, just curious.
Let me see what I put up.
I know you talk about.
Tab 31.
While you're looking that up, could I ask another question? And this may have been clarified in the presentation that I missed. They said 25% of those were in the targeted zip code. Did they really mean 25%? Or did they mean 25?
It's 100%.
Which was, so.
It's
just
25
a
students. Yes,
percent
ma'am.
number thing.
Yes.
Right.
And that has been fixed for future applications. They mean put percent.
Thank you.
100.
And again, it's the highest, the one that scored the highest. I look at the value. I think it's a great return on investment. It's a low cost per child for a lot of coverage.
And they've been around.
We're not paying all of it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know Mr. Leland had asked Mr. Hurley a question. No, that's fine. I was being patient and.
No, good.
Is there any, based on this discussion, are there any revisions to the score sheet that anybody would like to submit? Hearing none, we will now take up tab 32, Vow Now Corporation.
Well, I will, if it's not too late.
No, we can go back to 31.
I will give them 28 in the proposal section.
Okay,
In the
panelist
narrative.
6, we're moving
To
the,
answer your question, I think I just really was thoroughly impressed with their oral presentation. But your comment touched me, so.
So let me just break it down a bit. Her oral presentation was really to let the girls kind of get it. It wasn't about the organization coming bringing it to them. She wanted the girls to see the process of prior to grant. That's in a sense, girls to divas. Like you walk in the room, boom, you the diva, you spit. The diva get everything, you know what I'm saying? That's the concept, so that's why she did what she did. Other than that, she's a professor at FAMU, you don't think she could have came and gave better proposal than that?
so let the record reflect that the narrative score for panelist 6 is now at 28, bringing the total to 53. This elevates the total line item to 419 points with an average of 69.83. Now we will take up tab 32, the Vow Now Corporation.
You're coming into the home stretch, y'all.
The total points of 240 with an average score of 40. The highest score for this one was an 84 from panelist number 2, Ms. Faison. The lowest score was a 0 from panelist 6, Mr. Hurley. Are there any comments or questions related to this one?
So does this continue to be the extent of the budget document?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what we got, right?
I mean, I guess by score that they're probably not even up really, but I think that this is, I mean, the budget alone.
Right. That's what I'm saying. See something.
If you allow me, I will just confirm that nothing additional was submitted to your question.
It was just difficult to evaluate this because there was so much insane information.
Right.
No,
That's why I did this one low, because I didn't have the information. I'm saying that it's not a bad program, I mean, it's a bad program, but they had a lot of stuff that was missing, so. I'm like,
based on this discussion, would anybody like to revise their score sheet?
Yeah, I would like to change my budget to a 10. I missed that.
Panelist number 2, revising the third column from a 28 down to a 10. This reduces the overall score for panelist number 2 to 66. Are there any additional revisions to scores? The new total for that tab is 222 for an average of 37. We will now take up tab 33, the Omega Lamplighters. The total points awarded were 513 out of a potential 600 for an average score of an 85.5. The highest score coming from panelist number 5, Principal Smith, and the lowest is a 72 coming from panelist number 6, Mr. Hurley. Are there any comments or questions from the panelists?
so did they submit, even though they were, I mean, we know they were, like they were, speaks for itself, but did they submit a weekly schedule and organization chart?
I think the schedule's in here.
Hold on, my bad, I'm already in the wrong, my bad. Yeah, I'm trying to go.
That's okay. Any questions about tab 33? Comments or questions? Submission?
Sure. Did we ask about this 17,500 travel and daily? Is that like a van rental? Is it buying a vehicle?
So I think, I'm just telling you what I think. What I think is what they do. I know the last time they traveled on a charter bus. So they take them to college, like college town on charter. They charter buses because it's like they take the whole crew, like the junior lamp lighters, the light lamp lighters, and the male lamp lighters. They put all of them on the bus, and that's the only way that you can. That's the only way you can. No disrespect, I mean, but they got so many names that I tell you. But yeah, they try to run the bus.
So we're paying $7,500 for a lightning mascot.
am I reading that right? You know, because I really like the group, the cost is insane. I mean, the cost is 3 times higher than plenty of other applicants, and it's substantially, it's almost 10 times higher, it is 10 times higher than several applicants. And I just wish that they could have fixed that, I wish that.
So, in my experience, what they do, it is expensive. Like they got their own shoes. You know, the kids, they create their own shoes, the kids create their own shoes. Like what they do, and the money that they ask for, I mean.
But I mean, even to your point of they create their own shoes, if they started, say, $1,000, which is still on the high end of cost per kid, and they create their own shoes or whatever else, you're saying there's $1,800 value add on every single kid. It's just a lot. It's a lot to stomach, and I understand that they're.
But now, also remember, everybody that's coming to this summer program stay with them the whole year. So it's not just like a summer program. They're gonna get there the summer, but eventually they're gonna probably be there the whole year and join after summer.
Well, sure, but what's that got to do with anything? I mean,
I'm just trying to get, you said why $18,000 is, a kid went through it, it was 12, like 2 years ago. But they take them, bro, and I tell you, they give them the best college experiences. I mean, then they do stuff in the community, they always in the community.
I like going to level. I see them too. I just wish they were a little bit lighter in the budget, you know?
We will definitely again ensure any applicant that is selected to move forward, that all of their projected costs are 100% in line with our community investment partnership protocols, our guidelines, our fiscal guidelines.
What does that mean?
So that's part of the audit that we
That's
will
part of
do
the
to ensure
audit
that it's
to-
allowable.
Right, to ensure that everything in the budget is an allowable expense before we even sign the contract.
Well, I guess what I'm asking is my ears are kind of hearing polite government speak for, we're not going to spend $7,500 on a mascot.
So I'm not gonna go that far. What I'll say is, we will ensure that whatever is in the budget is an allowable expense. In this case, for this particular applicant, if I remember the presentation correct, team, correct me if I'm wrong, part of what they're doing is bringing in brand new members into the Lamplighters. So to Mr. Whitfield's point, it starts, but it will extend past the summer. Again, let me say though, we will look at the budget and ensure that what they are requesting is in line with us, will not go higher, but could definitely go lower.
Based on this discussion, is there any revisions to anyone's individual report sheet? Hearing none, we will now take up tab 34. Officially on the last 5. Total points were awarded 198 out of the potential 600 for an average score of 33. I will say that this was one of the ones that were permitted to submit additional documentation, and they did. It was provided to you virtually in the packet, so you will not have printouts of that. And that did include the revised budget and clarification of costs per child that was asked during the presentation. Oh, the highest score awarded was a 55 by panelist number 3, Ms. Denny, and the lowest score awarded was a 20 tied between panelist number 4, Mr. Leland, and panelist number 6, Mr. Hurley. Are there any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists? Again, this is tab 34, sewing seeds, sewing comfort industry. Hearing none, are there any revisions to this score sheet that anybody would like to note for the record? We will now take up tab 36, link up tally. This was an applicant who submitted I do apologize, I just noted that a star was not included on sowing seeds, and it should have been, as I stated and talked about it, but I didn't actually include a star. That will be reflected in the final version as well. Tab 36 is link a tally. This was also one that has submitted both and was given the opportunity to resubmit everything. As you may recall, he brought a printout to his presentation. That printout was then uploaded with all of the missing documentation and uploaded into the portal. So all of the attachments were completed. The revised budget was for 45,760. He earned a 291 points and a potential 600 with an average of a 48.5. The highest score came from panelist number 4, 88 points from Mr. Leland, from Mr. Whitfield, sorry. And the lowest was a 12 from panelist number 1, Ms. Kanaya.
So this is the guy who's driving, he drops the bus off and then kicks over them. Thank you.
So the reason why I scored so high is because most of what he does is in the area, Basin Street, Joe Louis, Fulton Street, City, Hollyfield. He even brought his kids to the fish fry. And you know, when Bill probably did the fish fry. So he is very involved with the kids. So that's why I go to him, because not only does I hear about his program, I actually see them when I'm out going to different events. And they, like, he get ready to, from what I understand, they get ready to add mental health specialists to it. So they really taking the steps. And he's been doing it for 5-6 years. So
You know, I gave him an 87. I really liked how, you know, I think people probably just trust him in their communities, and the idea that you just pull out his bus and these kids start piling out or in. I do think it is the kind of applicant that this kind of money could make a real difference in, and it does stick out to me as uniquely different than a lot of the other applicants.
Any additional discussion regarding tab 36? Would anyone care to make revisions to their scores?
As far as the budget from
Yes, ma'am. Originally, it was not included, and then he was given that opportunity for the combined one to resubmit, and he did. Okay. Any other revisions? We will now take up tab 37, the Robin's Nest Preschool and Learning Center. This is the one where I will fall on my sword. She was permitted to submit a new budget, and it was submitted on time and everything. It went into my junk, and I didn't know I had a junk. I have a spam folder and a junk folder. Who knew that you had both? And she actually just checked in with me yesterday, and we looked and we found it. And so that was the message that I sent out. And I just want to be fully transparent and say the reason why you didn't receive it last week was because I did not put it there. So it was resubmitted for a total budget of 196,200. That does include that feeding component. The total scores submitted were at 235 points out of a potential 600 for an average score of 39.17. Any comments or questions from the panelists to the panelists?
what was the request on that?
196,200.
And the current operation budget is 48,000.
I don't have that documented on my sheet.
Well, I scored it the way I did only because, like, I'm all about making sure that our people get what they need. Man, it was really nothing really to stand on. That made me feel like it was going to be an impact. What they want to do for the program. I think it that I got to look at. And so there's a recommendation. That's why I scored it, because it's nothing really in this application that tells me what the program, what's going to be the outcomes of the program, like what can I expect from the program. But it's a whole lot of money. That's the damn question.
Any additional comments or questions from the panelists? Would anyone like to submit a revised score sheet for tab 37? Seeing none, we will move on to tab 38, Diamonds in the Rough, Sports, Entertainment, and Education. The total points awarded were 283 out of a possible 600, with an average score of 47.17. The highest score awarded was 73 by panelist number 4, Mr. Leland. The lowest score awarded was a 19 by panelist 1, Ms. Kamea. Are there any comments or questions from the panelists or to panelists? Hearing none, would anyone like to submit a revised score sheet? Moving on, we will now take up our final tab 39, Jacob Chapel Baptist Church. You will note that there are 2 stars here. Jacob Chapel did submit 2 separate applications. Their original request for $89,963 remains. They followed directions and submitted a line 1 and a line 2, so they did not have to do anything separate. Their feeding component is separate from their learning component, but their learning component does include a feeding element. And to the panelist question, there was clarity provided. Even though they didn't combine, they did provide clarity based on the question that was submitted regarding the number of, I'm sorry, that's for feeding. Ignore me. So their total score was awarded were 469 points out of 600 for an average score of a 78.17. The highest score awarded was a 90 by panelist number 1, Ms. Kamea. The lowest score awarded was a 45 by panelist number 6, Mr. Hurley. Are there any comments or questions from the panelists or to the panelists?
The reason I scored them poorly was primarily because I gave them a low score on the budget. I just really don't like seeing on kid-related entities.
Church on these individuals, but they actually are pillars in the community on the south side. So and summer program and Richard summer program. This my thing was knowing where they are and who's gonna get served in that area was like this thing that it was a plus for the next amount of time for the church to that church. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, if you look at that side of town, that's Boulder Street all the way out to almost by the airport. But it also crosses back and get you down, you know, they cover a large area of the south side with their VD and stuff like that, so that's why I scored it.
And your point and thinking about the piece. And I know that we really do want to be sure that we have organizations that are in the hit business and are really looking at in some ways what's being done here. But they are almost really directly, located directly across the street from Pineview Elementary School, and do a great deal outside of this program to support those students and those in the surrounding areas.
Based on this discussion, would anybody like to revise their score sheet for tab 39? With that, we'll finalize the score sheet, or finalize the score sheet that we were just sharing, and we will be posting that later. For those of you who did offer revisions, I want to ask you to take your score sheet that has your name written in the corner. Make sure that you've noted those revisions. Dr. Green has done a very good job. Sorry, has done a very good job at documenting them. If you failed to document your revisions while you were talking and you would like to look at her copy before you leave, please make sure that each of you, we will accept a signed copy from each of you, whether you changed it or not. If you have made changes, we crossed out and kind of initialed where those changes are, is relevant for us. With that, I'm gonna thank you and to remind you again of the next step in the process. We will finalize the score sheet. That score sheet will be provided to the council. They will discuss it during the April 20th meeting right here in this room. It should be live streamed as well, and they will be the ones making those final determinations. Award notifications will go out the next day. And I just want to make a comment or two comments, and I'll turn it back over to Sika for wrap up and member comments. Is for those that are not selected, there's a couple of opportunities for them to build their capacity. Specifically, we have a community of practice that we will establish. They will not only be able to access one-on-one feedback directly about their application and the help of your comments and today's comments shared here, that will be provided to them, as well as they'll be invited to participate in a community of practice where they will have our capacity building services working directly with them on how to strengthen their application. So we've been taking notes of suggestions for collaboration or innovation, or really thinking about your budget and finding community partners to kind of fill some of that operationally should they not advance to the next phase. So really just wanted to say thank you for the very detailed commentary. And with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Yes, so very quickly, thank you so much, because this was a lion's job for sure, and we appreciate your work. We also would love it if you go out in the community and encourage your neighbors, your coworkers, your colleagues to sign up to serve as an evaluator. We have 3 opportunities coming up. We have 3 procurements that we will need evaluators. One in particular is a pretty big one, and we'll need not only an evaluation team, but a negotiation team. With that, Holly outlined the next steps. You are more than welcome to view that. It will be live streamed. And then lastly, we will bring you together to do a debrief. So you can still email us any suggestions you have for future application processes. We did get that information from several of you. With that, before we close out with adjournment, we would like to kick it to each of you if there are any closing comments you would like to provide. And so Mrs. Faison, I will start with you.
Well, I just want to thank you all for your hard work. I know this is not an easy task and you're making it up as you go along, I'm sure, in a rush. And I do have some thoughts on the process that I'll send to you, but no, I don't know.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to participate. I did take some time to write down some ideas to try to improve the process, but and I think the first thing would be just to give us a little bit more time between the point at which we received materials and then the presentation started, because the presentations, which I largely missed because of my exposure to COVID, really were helpful in terms of understanding what people were applying for, and some of the people who were not great applicant writers could clarify that when they presented. And so having enough time to read the applications before they were presenting in front of us, I think would be an improvement in the evaluation process.
Mr. Leland.
I just want to say thank
Mr.
you.
Whitfield.
That's actually my first man.
Mr. Leland, the second.
Take the whole, man. That's.
Okay.
But I just want to say thank y'all for allowing me to sit on the evaluation team. I don't even want to it's the process. Like until we get where we at, we're gonna always do that. Like this is the second time. So I think we did a good job. Looking forward to the next times. But I don't want y'all to get discouraged. Like it's a process. And we have to get the community on board, get everybody, it's a working process. It's like this is children's service council. Like it's gonna have to be a community thing. So I don't want y'all to get discouraged on the feedback that y'all be hearing. When we do our debriefing, we're gonna have a lot of suggestions, which I talk to y'all anyway, one-on-one. So outside of that, my main thing is, are we gonna get the people who we sitting here making decisions to provide services for involved, side of the entities that's providing the service during the summer or yes. So that's what I want to see. Who we spending our money on, let them get from the street, work a little bit. I think.
Dr. Smith.
I just wanted to share as well that I appreciated the opportunity to serve, but also to have dialogue with folks of varying opinions in our community. And I know that there were some organizations where scores at my end say might have been rated high. But I do want to say that I think that for organizations that are willing to support some of the most disenfranchised children in our community and at a level which allows them to be treated with the regard and respect that we want them to have, I think that that's an investment worth making. And it's something that is very important to me just in my everyday work. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be able to contribute to this process and hopefully have some impact on children who are significantly, important to all of us.
Yeah, thank you for including me, and thank you to the people who've endured me throughout this process. I would love to see the success of the programs. I mean, I know that you all are going to do site visits or whatever you got planned, but I just look forward to seeing kids have fun and, you know, all that. And so if we can be involved in any way, I think I speak for everyone to say we'd love to see that firsthand and stay involved. So thank you.
Thank you.
I said volunteers for life.
Yeah.
Down.
So thank you so much. Please go out and be a mouthpiece for the importance of the community being involved in the evaluation process, because the community, if you own property, people have heard me say this before, they're investors in the work that we do. And then lastly, I'll say, since we're closing out, what this teaches me, and every time I'm involved in anything where we're bringing these diverse communities together, is that we are more alike than we are different. Our thoughts are more aligned than they are divergent. And so that's why I want to encourage everybody. I do this all the time. Please come into the process, ask us questions. We are all here. We encourage you to participate either virtually or in person in the decision-making process. And with that, by consensus, we can be adjourned. Thank you all so much.
Hey, I know somebody needs some food. They enjoy Lewis.
Sign your floor sheet, and we're gonna pick those up.